This is Christian Gomez with the New American Magazine, and today on the program we have with us a frequent guest to the program, Trevor Loudon from New Zealand, anti-communist researcher, author, filmmaker, contributor for both the New American Magazine and also the Epoch Times newspaper. Trevor, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me, Christian.
So recently, NBC News put out a hit piece, so to speak, on the Epoch Times publication, which you also contribute to, attacking the Epoch Times newspaper for being anti-communist, but doing so in a way that made it look as though it's an anachronistic thing to still be anti-communist, as if they're a paranoid organization to sort of make fun of the Epoch Times paper and discredit their legitimacy. Meanwhile, of course, NBC has also been pushing for the Trump Russiagate conspiracy theories, trying to accuse the president of being an agent for Moscow, including with Russia. Yet here we see NBC News being an apologist for the Communist Party of China regime by attacking the Epoch Times and its defense of the Hong Kong protesters. And for those watching out there who may not be aware of the Epoch Times, it is a pro-Free China newspaper based out of New York City. So Trevor, can you tell us a little bit about NBC's attack on the Epoch Times paper and also a little bit about the Epoch Times as well?
Well, Epoch Times has been around for some time, and it arose out of the Falun Gong movement in China, which is a sort of spiritual movement, similar, it's got elements of Buddhism in it, Confucianism, and it grew up in China in the early 90s. And for a start, it was actually accepted by the Chinese government because it sort of emphasized good physical health and that kind of thing. But then when it grew very big, the Chinese cracked down on it and are still persecuting it now as they persecute genuine Christians and other religious minorities in China still today. So the Epoch Times has a mission. It is to free China, to get rid of the Communist Party in China. And their paper, which takes a very strongly anti-communist line, and also a very strongly pro-freedom line, and is generally supportive of President Trump, has become a real force in this country and around the world. It's got massive distribution, and it's really apparently upsetting the Chinese government. And they have a big PR problem on their hands right now with Hong Kong, the anti-communist protesters in Hong Kong who are overtly pro-American. The Chinese want to crack down on them, but they know the economic problems that may result from that and the international problems that may result. So they're using their propaganda to discredit the protesters and the protester supporters. And it's just sort of coincidental this would be the time that NBC decides to attack the Epoch Times to discredit them, and particularly which I found shocking, was that one of the main criticisms was that the Epoch Times is anti-communist. Like this
that
is something
should be a virtue,
wrong.
not something to criticize.
Well, it's why I write for them. It's the main reason, because they are allies in the anti-communist fight, just as the JBS is. There are a few organizations in America. There's many organizations in America who say they're pro-freedom, but there are very, very few who take an active anti-communist stand.
Exactly.
And communism is the biggest enemy of freedom we have today, right now, not 30 years ago, 20 years ago, right now. So anybody who opposes communism, we've got to reach out to and yet be on good terms with.
And those are valid points that you're making, Trevor, because if someone peruses, let's say, Fox News, you rarely ever hear the term communism or communist used on the network, as if they're afraid to say the C word there. Why do you think, Trevor, that many conservative organizations and conservative leaning networks shy away from talking about communism explicitly and even going so far as actually condemning and opposing communism?
Well, see, Fox News will criticize Venezuela, but it's all on economic terms. You know, that they're impoverishing the country. Socialism impoverishes the country, but they won't say that Venezuela is a communist dictatorship backed by Cuba and Russia and China, which it is, militarily supported by those two major
And
countries.
Fox never mentions that Nicolas Maduro and also his predecessor Chavez were both supported by the Communist Party of Venezuela, the Partido Comunista de Venezuela, the PCV.
Absolutely. And just by the way, a top aide to Nicolas Maduro was one of the international guests at the recent Democratic Socialists of America convention in Atlanta. So this so-called Democratic Socialist organization had several communists were guests there. The leader of the Communist Party of Austria, the former East German Communist Party, the Sudanese Communist Party, for instance. But they also had an aide to Maduro. So, you know, they're not all about Northern Europe and social democracy. These people are hardcore communists.
They're reaching out to the international communist movement.
They are part of the international communist movement now. But you know, why won't the conservatives call it the communists? Because many so-called conservatives in America now, they put free trade before national security. You know, it's all about the money. It's all about building up wealth. And I'm for free trade, but not when it comes at the expense of your national security.
Why is that? What are the dangers of having free trade with China? They make so many goods at low cost, or even Russia or Cuba. Why shouldn't we trade with these communist regimes, Trevor?
Well, for instance, I'll give you an example. You know, well, you go back to Nazi Germany before World War II. American companies were doing massive trade deals with Nazi Germany right up to the outbreak of war. And then American boys would go and have to clean up the mess and get shot at with munitions made in German factories. You know, after the Bolshevik Revolution, it was many American companies that kept the Bolshevik Revolution alive. So they made billions trading with the Soviet Union. Then the American taxpayer had to spend about 10 times that actually building up America's military to defend itself from the Soviet Union. And right now, China and America, it's really like Nazi Germany 1938. You know, they are preparing for war for the United States. They were an agrarian economy 30, 40 years ago. And when Nixon and Kissinger opened up trade to China, that set the Chinese on a path to where they can now challenge America militarily. They're building 60 ships a year, warships a year, while America's building 8 or 9. They have one of the world's biggest armies, some of the most high tech you can imagine, and they're allied to Russia. So Russia's got the nukes, and China's got everything else, plus a huge army.
Okay, Trevor.
We have built up our own enemy.
Valid point. We've built up our own enemy, just like we did with Nazi Germany before World War II. Big business is playing a crucial role in building up our future adversaries, but we're running out of time now. One last question, Trevor. With the case of Nazi Germany, they were brought down through a war. What do you recommend to bring communist China to its knees? What should the U.S. do in this case now?
Look, the president has the authority under an act passed by Jimmy Carter to actually basically ban trade with China. He could order all American companies out of China, and I believe he should. But on the path to that, maximum economic pressure. We need to be actually aiming for regime change in China. We shouldn't be accepting the communist status quo. We should be economically isolating China to the point where the Communist Party of China is thrown out of office or overthrown, and an actual patriotic, pro-freedom government can take power in China, or maybe several, and maybe China may split to several different countries. Either of those options would be great for America, would be great for the world. We now make billions trading with China and spend trillions defending ourselves from them. We need to end the communist regime in China, and that has to be done through economic isolation and the maximum use of America's economic power to basically outcompete them and shut them down to the point that regime change becomes inevitable.
Okay, and for those of you watching out there, the act by President Jimmy Carter that Trevor Loudon was referring to is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or the IEEPA, that was signed by President Carter back in 1977. Now, you can read what Trevor Loudon has said here today in this interview, an article that he wrote in the Epoch Times entitled, "It's Not Enough to Be Pro-Freedom, We Must Also Be Actively Anti-Communist." So be sure to check out Trevor's article on the Epoch Times there as well, and also be sure to follow us on follow the New American on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Trevor, any final thoughts or words before the program ends?
Just that we have to take this seriously. President Donald Trump Jr. recently said that the 2020 election will be communism versus freedom. Communism still exists. It's worse than it ever has been. It's morphed, it's economically powerful, and it's challenging the United States and the West. If we don't take this seriously, they will win. And they'll only win because we have been weak, not because they have been strong. We've got to use our economic muscle to shut them down so we can work towards a free world where every country has a free government, a government of the people, so that the local people can run their own affairs without the curse of communism on their backs.